I was young when I left Florin for the camps, and Fresno, I can't remember anything, but after some time in Fresno, we went to Jerome, Arkansas, the furthest eastern relocation camp, and I started grammar school there, and I can just remember a few things about Arkansas, the kindergarten classes, and like men would go out to the woods to cut firewood, and the women would do their chores. And I remember my dad was the block manager for Block 9. And so he had his kind of administrative duties, and my wife, my mother rather, with 5 kids at that time, she just had her hands full, I think, taking care of us. And then we moved on to Gila, Arizona after our time in Arkansas. And I can remember a little bit more there, whereas Arkansas was very cold in the winter, and then it was kind of a swampland there near Little Rock. The Arizona camp was located south of Phoenix, and it was very much a desert climate there, and we had temperatures as high as I think probably up to the 115-degree area. And so I remember standing in line for ice cream. People take it for granted here that ice creams was a real luxury in camps, and we waited in lines a block long in 115-degree weather for one scoop of ice cream. We saw movies on the side of a mountain, and I remember when Uncle Al came and took us to Phoenix, the first time I saw a movie indoors, that was something, and then stopping at a fountain and having an ice cream sundae. But basically, there was not a heck of a lot to do in the camp, so we watched national pastime of baseball. It was very popular with the young Japanese American boys, so we had baseball teams. And I remember a little bit about just walking in the desert area there, and but basically there wasn't a heck of a lot we had to do, so a very trying time, especially for older people, I think, like my older brothers who were more of a high school age. They recall that they didn't enjoy hardly anything about the camps, but I, being younger, was fortunate that I could remember some better times and not experiencing the hardships that maybe a teenager or grown-ups would endure or face during the camps. I think our family was greatly affected by the camps, and I think about my dad in particular. I was just reading last night this book by Mary Tsukamoto, and I just want to cite a couple of brief paragraphs that she talked about my dad and my mom. But my dad was born in 1906, so it's 100 years ago now. But looking at this paragraph, a couple of paragraphs here in Mary Tsukamoto's book, and maybe people here in the Elk Grove area think about Mary as a school teacher that was, voted Teacher of the Year. A school's named after her here, but so instead of being boastful from a standpoint of the immediate family, I thought I'd take something from Mary's book, and she makes some, comments here that she said that my mother graduated from Elk Grove High. My dad did too, and my mom was the first Nisei student body treasurer. And then my mom married Harold Ouchida, a bright young businessman and president of the newly formed Northern California Farms Company, one of the strawberry shippers. And so my dad, in 1929, he was only 23 years old, and he was already owner of a company for shipping strawberries. And when we went to camp, he had over 20 trucks. Went to work every day with suit on, and I think he was, very successful and very proud of himself for having accomplished what he did at a very young age. And then when he came back, he started the business again, tried valiantly to start the strawberry company with, I remember he bought an old Army truck and an International panel. So with 2 vehicles, he started this company that previously had over 20 trucks. And Mary makes another comment here, if I may, very quickly here about his efforts after camp. And it says, Harold Ouchida, Al's brother-in-law, was determined to get the strawberry business started again in Florin. It was almost apparent from the beginning, however, that it could not be done. It was such a formidable undertaking to tackle alone. East Bay farmers were older and many were not physically well enough to start over again. For 10 years they grew berries, but the famous delectable Florin strawberries would never be what they once were. Strawberry time was over for Florin, and I think it was for my dad too, and had a real bearing on his health. I think he drank too much. He died at age 59, so I think a very man with a lot of pride, and I think just having to cope with success at an early age and then losing that business had just a very detrimental effect on my dad. Fortunately, I started Elk Grove High School in 1951. So that was already 6 years after we had returned from the camps. So we had a little bit of problems. When I was in the third grade when I returned, I remember, some of the kids would call us Japs or whatever, but it ended very quickly. My oldest brother, who went to Elk Grove High School as a sophomore, he had some incidents that were more severe, I think, because kids probably are a little bit meaner at an older age than young grammar school kids. So, but it kind of, lessened as far as the prejudice with each year, and I think things were fine by the time I was in high school. After camp, I think probably maybe, I'm not sure now, maybe 70% of the people returned. Some people lost their farms. Others had people who had taken care of their farms, etc. So they returned to their farms. And the 50s, 40s, and the late 40s and 50s, I think in a way they were kind of good years because the war was over and it was a rather peaceful time. For the Japanese, I think the community was still strong as far as the Japanese churches. They used to have Japanese movies in the halls, Japanese baseball teams. So it was very much still a Japanese-oriented community. Then as the years went on, and I think the people started going off to college and all, we started breaking out and socializing and integrating much more with the rest of the community. But the years right after the war, it was still a very tight Japanese community, socially and in a business sense. I think the experiences of the war were real predominant in a lot of Japanese Americans' thinking, and I think the fact that we were subjected to that, if you would say maybe imprisonment for up to about 4 years, it had a bearing on, I think, people being very sensitive to accomplishing more maybe in their lives and trying to make something out of their lives. So I think the rate of people going on to college was very high for Japanese Americans, probably due a lot to that camp experience, because people wanted to do better. I think about my uncle, Pedro Ouchida, who served in the 442nd. The 442nd was a unit comprised of all Japanese Americans. And they went on to serve very valiantly and were, the unit itself was the most decorated unit in the U.S. Army's history for a unit of its size. A fantastic accomplishment, or I'm not sure if that's the word for it, but the fact that the 442nd received 21 Medal of Honors, the highest award, that really speaks for, I think, the patriotism again, for people who were in prison to volunteered to fight. I get a little bit emotional. But I think I'm just very proud of Uncle Pedro and all the others that fought in the 442. So I think that was accomplishments of the 442nd. I think was something that the whole Japanese American community took a lot of pride in. Okay. After finishing Elk Grove High School, and I should mention that because this is part of the Elk Grove High's program, but my mom and dad both went to Elk Grove. All my brothers and sisters went to Elk Grove. But after I finished Elk Grove, I went on to Sacramento City College for 2 years. And then I transferred to the University of California, Berkeley, and majored in accounting. And I think about that as a career. I did fine, but I worked for the state in the Department of Finance doing budgeting more than accounting, and served for about 40 years for the state. But I kind of look back and think about maybe the camp experience being something for me that I became very conservative and wanted a job that definitely something like accounting, engineering, pharmacy. Those were things that Japanese Americans were going into. But then I look back and say, if I had to go back and do it again, I would major in landscape architecture because I always had this liking for drafting, looking at magazines or books that had more of an aesthetic thing as far as design and gardening and landscaping. And I look back and I said, geez, I think I could have been a pretty good landscape architect. But I think maybe the influence again of the camp and the conservatism of a lot of Japanese Americans kind of led me to that accounting area, but who knows? I think it's great that schools and the State Museum, there's an effort to retain some of the history of the Japanese American experience, and especially the camp years, because it's something that's a very significant part of American history that shouldn't be forgotten. And it's something that there's a lot of people that don't know, a bit about. And it is a very significant thing that a population was deprived of their civil liberties and their constitutional rights and put into these camps for about 4 years. And that part of history probably should not be forgotten. Dan Inouye, the senator, he talks about, maybe you've heard the story, but having known Mariel, but when he came back from the war, and here he was with this full uniform, with all his battle ribbons, a left arm missing from battle, walks into a barber shop, and the barber tells him, "We don't cut Jap hair." That's,